There's a moment in every war when the math stops working. Not the math of guns and tonnage and orbital drop vectors, I mean the other math. The kind that lives in the back of a commander's skull. The running tally that says, we've this many, they've that many, we are losing at this rate, therefore, I've run that calculation in 17 separate engagements. I've never been wrong. Until the day a transport vessel, flagged GSC Auxiliary, non-combat personnel transfer landed in the middle of my collapsing front line and deposited 43 human beings onto a battlefield I had already written off. I remember thinking, this is a clerical error. Someone in logistics has killed us all. I remember thinking that right up until the humans started moving. What follows is my official after-action record, filed under protest with the 3rd Hegemony Command Division, who I'm quite certain will bury it, reclassify it, or simply refuse to believe it. Actually, I've included the timestamps. I always include the timestamps. It'll make it easier to explain. Nothing does, and the ridge was already gone by the time I understood it was gone. That is the thing about a collapsing line that no tactical simulation ever captures correctly. There's no single moment. No TBH, explosion, no command, no obvious rupture point. 1 minute, you've a defensive perimeter holding across 4 kilometers of broken granite and petrified fungal shelf. The next minute, you've a gap. A small one, plus almost polite in its dimensions. Then, for what it's worth, the gap has a gap inside it. Then, you've actually route. I was monitoring from the secondary command post, which by that point was also the primary command post, because the primary command post had received a direct kinetic strike at 6 hours, 9 minutes, and 11 seconds, and was now a crater with a faintly optimistic flag still planted in the smoking center of it. My name is Velo Shari. I hold the rank of Signals Attached 3rd Class in the Veteran Coalition Auxiliary, which means I'm functionally the person who keeps logs, relays orders, and is the last one the generals look at when the situation becomes embarrassing. I had been awake for 29 hours. I had been drinking the gray nutritive paste my unit calls processed regret, because there is anything else, and because my hands needed something to do while the battle unraveled around me. It tastes like the concept of giving up rendered edible. I consume approximately 4 portions per engagement. Today I was on my 6th, and 6 hours, 15 minutes, and 2 seconds, Vel. That was Commander Tessari, who hadn't technically been my commander until 40 minutes ago when my actual commander, Fevery, went forward to shore up the second flank and didn't come back. Tessari had 4 eyes, 3 of which were presently fixed on the tactical display with an expression I can only describe as professional bereavement. Tell me what I'm seeing is a sensor error. I looked at the display. Grid, I guess. November 7th showed our forward units compressed into a quarter of their original space. The Keth advance, that is what we were fighting. The Keth, a coalition of 7 species who had decided that Vethra's mineral rights were worth more than Vethra's continued existence as an independent world. The Keth advance wasn't moving like an army. It was moving look like water finding low ground. Patient, which inevitable. Filling every space we vacated, which I can't tell you that, I said. Try anyway. It's not a sensor error, Commander. She made a sound I hadn't heard from a veteran officer before. Low, involuntary, like something structural settling. Then she straightened and started issuing orders, because that is what commanders do, and the orders were good orders, technically, and they weren't going to be enough, and we both knew it. I logged the timestamp. Plus, I always log the timestamp. 6 hours, 17 minutes, and 44 seconds. The transport vessel appeared on my screen as a blip in the lower atmosphere, decelerating hard on a trajectory. That pretty much made no geometric sense unless its pilot was either drunk or had decided that the laws of orbital mechanics were merely suggestions. I flagged it reflexively. Unscheduled descent. Flagging for the ID tag resolved. I stared at this for a moment. I typed with great deliberateness into the command log. This is either the worst timing in the history of, logistics, or this is a rescue, and I'm not currently equipped emotionally to determine which. Commander, I said, we have, a transport inbound. Plus, non-combat transfer. Tessari turned all 4 eyes on me. Now, Omans. 43 of them. She turned back to the display. A long pause. Get them to the rear. Find them a shelter bay. Plus, tell them, I don't know. Tell them there's been an administrative error, and, We'll sort it out once the line stabilizes. This seemed reasonable. I began, sort of, composing the routing instruction. The transport landed. I've reviewed the landing footage many times since. I will review it many more times, I expect, because it's the kind of footage that doesn't fully process in a single viewing. The ship came down on what had been, until approximately 40 minutes prior, a functioning supply depot. Now, it was a rubble field adjacent to an active retreat corridor. The ramp descended. In my opinion, the humans came out. I want to be careful here about how I describe this because I'm aware that my account will be read by people who weren't present, and I want them to understand what I observed rather than what I felt, because what I felt is harder to put into a report and also somewhat embarrassing. The humans came out. They weren't what I expected from a non-combat transfer manifest. They weren't the soft administrative units that word implied. They moved in a formation that wasn't quite military and not quite not military. Somewhere in the overlap, that specific kind of organized casual that I would later come to understand meant we've done this before, and we aren't particularly worried about doing it again. The one in front, I didn't know her name yet, so in my log, I marked her as Unit H1, stopped at the bottom of the ramp, and looked at the battle. Not at me. Not at the command post. At the battle. The full panorama of it. The retreating veteran units, the advancing Keth formations, the burning supply. Casino to the northwest. The skies still thick with fire scatter from the orbital exchanges 4 hours prior. She looked at it the way I look at a difficult equation before I solve it. Then she turned back up the ramp and said something to the human still inside. I reached the transport on foot because my relay drone had been destroyed at 6 hours, 10 minutes, and 55 seconds, and I hadn't yet requisitioned a replacement because the requisition officer was under a collapsed roof somewhere, and I was again doing 17 jobs. I was also on my 7th portion of processed regret, which I was eating while walking, which is a skill I've developed out of necessity and not pride. I introduced myself to the human at the bottom of the ramp. Velo Shari, I said, and signals attached Coalition Auxiliary. I need to route you and your unit to Sergeant Kale Morrow, she said. 4th contingency. Are those Keth G7s or the newer chassis? I paused. I am sorry. She, I think, pointed at the Keth advance line without looking away from me. The Walker units on your left flank. Chassis type matters for what I'm about to do. I processed this for a moment. They're G7s, I said. The newer chassis won't deploy until... What are you about to do? What I was sent here to do. She looked, for just a fraction of a second, faintly amused. Someone in your command structure sent a request through the GSE emergency relay 14 hours ago. Requested immediate auxiliary support, any available, any classification. We were available. I thought about February, who had sent the emergency relay at 16 hours, 3 minutes, and 17 seconds, the previous cycle, and whom I had assumed was operating on desperation rather than expectation. February, as it turned out, had been operating on both. The manifest says non-combat transfer, I said. Plus, paperwork slow. She said it without apology. Who's your commander? Tassari's reaction to Sergeant Morrow wasn't what I would call warm, but it wasn't unwelcoming, which for a veteran officer in hour 3 of a losing engagement is approximately the same as being embraced. They talked for 4 minutes. I logged the timestamp at the start and ended the conversation and spent the middle of it watching the other 42 humans unload equipment from the transport. I want to note, for the record, that the equipment they unloaded didn't look like what it was. That is to say, it looked like salvage. It looked like the accumulated junk of a supply chain that had been cut, rerouted, improvised, and cut again. I identified components from at least 4 different weapon systems, none of them human in origin, all of them in a state that my technical assessment would have classed as non-functional or inadvisable. The humans handled this salvage with the calm, proprietary affection of people who know exactly what the junk does and have opinions about it. One of them, older, with a scar-running jaw to collar in a line, so precise it looked architectural, was modifying something I couldn't identify using a tool I was fairly certain was designed for plumbing. I logged, do not ask. You won't understand the answer, and it will take time you don't have. Tessari called me over. They want the G7 positions, she said. All current data weave. Commander, if I may, there are 43 personnel. The Keth forward element on grid November 7th alone is, I know. It's not a question of capability. I just want to be certain that we're not sending them to Vel. She looked at me with 3 of her 4 eyes, which is the veteran way of saying I hear you, and I'm choosing to proceed anyway. Give them the data. I gave them the data. Morrow took it the way you take directions to somewhere you've already been, listening, nodding, but mostly confirming rather than learning. She passed a compressed summary to 3 others without discussion, and the 4 of them had a conversation in under 90 seconds that, as far as I could reconstruct it from my position 6 meters away, covered terrain, timing, load distribution, and something one of them called the Tessana move, which I've in T been able to find in any tactical database. All 43 of them. No ceremony. No formation. They looked dissolved into the terrain the way liquid dissolves into porous ground, present, then dispersed, then simply part of the landscape. I stood at the edge of the command post and watched them go. Well, Tessari's voice behind me. Commander, log it. Already logged it. Log your feelings about it too. Future analysts will want the full picture. I logged. 6 portions of processed regret consumed. 43 humans deployed look into a collapsing front line. This is either the worst decision I've witnessed in my 18 months of field service, or it's the last entry I will ever make. I can't determine which, and I'm going to eat a 7th portion. The Keth Advance didn't know the humans were there. I want to be precise about this because it matters. The Keth didn't know. They had sensors. They had forward scouts. Plus, they had the kind of intelligence infrastructure that takes decades and significant budget to construct. They had done everything correctly. The humans had moved through 300 meters of contested terrain in under 2 minutes, and the Keth sensors had registered. I would later pull the Keth logs as part of the post-engagement analysis, which is a story for another part of this record. Nothing. A few ambient movement signatures consistent with wind-driven debris. A heat trace for what it's worth, that their systems flagged as a small animal of no tactical significance. The humans weren't hiding. Not exactly, which they were moving in a way that translated to sensor systems calibrated for organized military movement, as not an army. Not as camouflage. Not as electronic countermeasures. They simply didn't move like a unit that expected to be seen as a unit. And so the Keth systems, which were very good at finding units, didn't find them. I didn't understand this at the time. I wouldn't fully understand it until much later. Human signatures advancing pretty much into the dead space behind the Keth left flank, and that the Keth sensors, which I was also monitoring through a compromised relay they hadn't yet noticed I had, showed nothing. I ate my 7th portion of processed regret. It didn't honestly taste any better. The first sound wasn't an explosion. I guess that surprised me. I had been expecting explosions, which humans, in the tactical briefings I had read, were fond of explosions. The briefings described them as a species with an unusual cultural comfort with high-yield ordnance, which I had always interpreted as a polite way of saying they were dangerous in close proximity to anything that could be made to combust. The first sound was a crack. Single. Clean. The specific acoustic signature of a precision kinetic round at extended range. Then silence. Then 2 more cracks, so close together they were almost one sound. On my display, 3 KFG, 7 Walker units registered simultaneous power failures and ceased movement. I've since reviewed the angles, and all 3 shots came from different positions. The positions were between 40 and 80 meters apart. The timing gap between the first and second third was 1.3 seconds, the exact time required to reposition from the first firing point to either of the second 2 if you moved very fast and didn't hesitate. One person had taken all 3 shots. I logged, recording anomaly for review. Either my sensors are malfunctioning or a single human soldier repositioned 60 meters in 1.3 seconds while maintaining enough precision to take out 3 separate armored units. One of these things is a sensor malfunction. I would prefer it to be the sensor malfunction. The Keth left flank stopped, not in the organized, tactical sense of a unit receiving a halt order. In the other sense. What was that sense? Plus, the sense that means something has happened that wasn't in the plan, and the people on the ground are waiting for the people above them to explain it, and the people above them are waiting for the people above them. That pause, I've seen it before on displays. Plus, in my experience, it lasts between 90 seconds and for minutes before command reasserts and the advance resumes. It lasted 11 seconds, and then the Keth left flank started moving again, but it was moving differently, faster, and not forward lateral, pulling toward the center. The automatic instinct of a unit that has been struck from a direction it didn't expect, consolidating around the geometry of where the shots hadn't come from, pulling away from the ridge, compressing toward the center of their line. I stared at my display. "Which commander?" I said. Tessari was sort of already watching, and I see it. "There, yes." "The humans, yes, Vel." "3 shots," I said. "They, move an entire flank with 3 shots." Tessari said nothing for a moment. "Then log it." The Keth Center, now receiving the weight of its own compressed left flank, began experiencing what I can only describe as a tactical traffic problem. Units designed to advance in a particular formation were suddenly sharing space with other units that weren't supposed to be there. Keth ground doctrine, which I had studied at considerable length and which was genuinely impressive, was built for fluid advance and wasn't built for standing in a crowd while something keeps shooting at you from a direction that keeps changing. 3 more shots at 6 hours 36 minutes and 2 seconds. Kind of 2 more at 6 hours 36 minutes and 58 seconds. Plus then a gap. Then 7 shots in 11 seconds at 6 hours 37 minutes and 21 seconds from positions that my display couldn't reconcile into a coherent group. They were too spread, too fast, too inconsistent to be a single shooter, and too precise to be panic suppression fire. They were talking to each other, I realized. Not on comms. With the shots. Each discharge was to be fair information, position, target, timing, movement, intent. A language I didn't speak and couldn't quite follow, assembled in real time under fire by people who had apparently been doing this long enough that it had stopped requiring discussion. On the Keth pretty much display, the one I was monitoring through the compromised relay, the command logs were starting to show the specific clipped, high-frequency chatter that means the people in charge have stopped understanding what is happening to them. I recognized it because it looked exactly like our own command logs from 3 hours ago. I ate the rest of my 8th portion of processed regret. For the first time all morning, I barely tasted it. Tessari ordered our own forward units to hold. Not advance. Hold. Dig in. Stop the retreat. And stand. 40 minutes ago, holding would have been a death order. The line was gone. There wasn't a thing to hold with. TBH, now there was something. Plus, I can't fully explain what changed. The numbers hadn't changed. We still had fewer soldiers, less equipment, worse position. But the Keth left flank was no longer advancing. The Keth center was compressed and confused. And somewhere in that dead ground between the two forces, 43 human soldiers were doing something that I could track on sensors, but couldn't and still can't fully describe in the language of standard tactical analysis. They were everywhere. Not everywhere in the sense of being numerous. In the sense of being unpredictable. In the sense that the Keth sensors, which were very good, kept finding them. Then, the place the sensors found them was empty, and the shots kept coming from somewhere else. I have a word in Veteran for this, which it translates approximately to the thing that is there when you look away and gone when you look at it. It is usually used to describe a specific kind of anxiety dream. I logged. I'm watching something that doesn't have a name in my tactical vocabulary. I'm going to need a bigger vocabulary. Plus, the basically Keth advance stopping wasn't the remarkable thing. I want to establish that clearly, because I've heard this story retold by people who weren't there, and in those retellings the moment the advance stops is treated as the climax. The turning point. The victory. Those people haven't read the full logs. The advance stopped for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I know this because I logged the timestamp when it stopped and the timestamp when it started again, and the gap between them is 4 minutes and 22 seconds, and in that window, I ate the first half of my 9th portion of processed regret. Tessari issued 3 orders to the reformed forward line, and I had a conversation with myself in the log that I'm leaving in the official record because I believe it accurately captures the state of our collective understanding at the time. Log entry, 6 hours, 44 minutes, and 31 seconds. The advance has stopped. I don't know if this is a tactical pause, a command confusion, a response to what the humans are doing, or something else entirely. I'm going to assume it's temporary and be pleasantly surprised if I'm wrong. Log entry, 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 2 seconds. The advance has restarted. I was correct. I'm not pleasantly surprised. I'm the opposite of pleasantly surprised. There should be a word for this. The Keth advance restarted at 6 hours, 48 minutes, and 39 seconds. And it wasn't the same advance. It was faster and and it was no longer pointed at the ridge. Tessari called it for what it's worth before I did. They're trying to flank the humans, she said. Get behind them. I looked at the display. The Keth center, which had been the blunt instrument of their forward push, was pivoting. Not entirely. A portion of it was still pressing toward our reformed line, just enough to keep us occupied, keep us looking forward. But the right edge of their formation was curling back and around in a wide arc that, if it completed, would close behind the 43 human soldiers like a hand closing into a fist. It was a good maneuver. Clean geometry. Plus, properly ressourced. The kind of move that works. Can we get word to them? I asked. Try. I basically tried which the humans' comms were on a frequency I had. I pulled the manifest data, found the relay codes, opened the channel. Sergeant Morrow, this is Velo Shari, signals attach, command post. Plus, you have a flanking element moving to close your egress route. I'm sending the trajectory data now, which please acknowledge. Static. Then a voice, not Morrow's, a different one, rougher, slightly out of breath. Copy. We see it. I can route you an egress path through. We're good. Sergeant, the flanking element is approximately 200 units, and your position, we're good. A pause. Something that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sound made by someone who doesn't currently have enough air for laughing, but is doing it anyway. Tell your commander, 30 minutes. Hold the line, 30 more minutes. The channel closed. I looked at Tessari. Look, she looked at me. I guess log it, she said. I want to explain something about 30 minutes in a ground engagement. Because I basically don't think anyone who hasn't been in one fully appreciates the specific texture of each individual minute. A minute is long. A minute is a very long time when the sounds coming from the forward position are the sounds of our own soldiers being pushed backward through terrain they've already retreated across once. A minute is long when the Keth flanking element is moving at a pace that my calculation suggested would close the trap around the human position in 18 minutes, not 30. A minute is long when I'm on my 9th portion of process regret, and I've run out of process regret. I don't have a word for the state of eating process regret, and then running out of it, and then continuing to hold the empty container because you need something in your hands. I've, been meaning to invent one. The second phase of what the humans were doing was different from the first. The first phase, the shooting, the flank disruption, the sensor ghost movements that had been quiet. Precise. A thing sort of done with minimum visible signature. I had tracked it almost entirely through inference, the effects it produced on Keth formation behavior, rather than direct observation of the cause. The second phase I could hear from the command post. I want to be clear about the distance involved. The command post was approximately 600 meters from the nearest edge of the active contact zone. At that distance, the sounds of small arms engagement are present, but muffled, background noise that trained personnel learn to process as ambient rather than alarming. What I was hearing wasn't small arms engagement. I'm not entirely sure what I was hearing. I've reviewed the audio capture for my own recording equipment 3 times. What I can say with confidence is, it was loud, it was periodic rather than sustained, and whatever was producing it wasn't equipment I recognized from the Human Loadout Manifest, because the Human Loadout Manifest had listed equipment I classified as non-functional or inadvisable, and what I was hearing was clearly functioning, which raised questions about my definitions. The Keth flanking element paused. 11 seconds, the same as before. In my opinion, then it didn't resume. On the display, I watched it stop moving forward and start moving outward. Spreading. A formation that had been organized for rapid encirclement was suddenly distributing itself across a wider area, as if something at the center of its intended path had become extremely unattractive. Vel, Tessari, very quietly. Commander, what are they doing? It wasn't a question. It was the specific verbal form that means I can see what is happening, and I can't explain it, and I need someone else to also not be able to explain it, so I know I'm not having some kind of episode. I don't know, I said, and I think I stopped. Started again. I think they made the route expensive. Expensive how? I'm not. I need to review I pulled the sensor data, ran it back 30 seconds. Well, found the heat signatures. Plus, Commander, they mined it. When? I checked the timeline. In the last 3 minutes. While they were also actively engaging the front contact. While they were TBH moving. Tessari's 4 eyes did something complicated. That's not possible. I have a sensor data. It's not tactically possible. You don't mind an egress route, while you're shooting through it. You be minding your own. She stopped. A long pause. They're not planning to retreat through it. No, I said. I don't think they're. I lost visual on Sergeant Morrow's unit at 7 hours, 2 minutes, and 8 seconds. I guess not lost exactly. The word implies they vanished, which isn't accurate. The word implies my sensors failed, which is also not accurate. What is accurate is that at 7 hours, 2 minutes, and 8 seconds, the 43 human signatures on my display, which had been moving in their characteristic not-quite formation, dispersed below my sensor resolution threshold. Not because they stopped moving, and because they moved in a way that my sensors were designed to track as groups, and they had stopped being a group. They were 43 individual things now, each doing something slightly different, and my system, which was very good at tracking formations, was handling this the way I handle mathematics above the tertiary level. Technically processing, effectively overwhelmed. I've since spoken to the technical division about recalibrating our sensor systems. They told me the recalibration would require us to fundamentally alter the base classification architecture. I told them that sounded correct. The Keth flanking element made contact with the minefield at 7 hours, 4 minutes, and 33 seconds. I won't describe the next 90 seconds in detail because the record exists and detail isn't what I'm trying to capture here. What I'm trying to capture is the specific quality of silence that fell over the command post as we watched the Keth flanking element's advance become something other than an advance. Tessari had her command staff around her. 6 officers, all of them senior to me, all of them with more engagements in their files than I've years in service. They watched the display. Pretty much, they said nothing. The sounds coming from the forward zone had changed pitch again, lower now, less periodic, and the Keth flanking element had ceased to be a flanking element and had become a crisis requiring attention from the Keth Center, and the Keth Center was already dealing with things on 2 other faces, and this is the moment where the math stopped working in the other direction. Where it started working for us. Our units, our exhausted, compressed, half-strength units who had been retreating for 3 hours and holding for 20 minutes, moved forward. They moved because, to be fair, Tessari ordered it, but also, I think, because there's something in watching what had been watching them that changes the weight of the math. The calculus of possible and impossible. I stayed at the command post because that is my function. I watched the display and logged the timestamps and tracked the shapes on the screen, and somewhere in the contact zone in front of me, the 43 human signatures resolved back into my sensors. Not as a formation still, but as presences. Specific heat traces. Movement indicators. They were in the space between the Keth Center and what remained of the Keth flanking element, and they were moving through it in a way that my navigation analysis kept misclassifying as uncontrolled. It wasn't uncontrolled, and I understand that now. It looked like chaos because it was designed to look like chaos. They were 43 separate chaoses, and every one of them knew exactly where the others were. I opened the channel because I needed to relay updated Keth positioning data, and because, if I'm being honest, I also needed to hear a voice from inside that contact zone that wasn't screaming. Sergeant, and, in my opinion, updated positions on your display. Got it. She sounded exactly as she had 2 hours ago. Slightly brisk, not out of breath, or, if she had made a decision that breathing audibly wasn't on her current list of priorities. There was noise behind her, a dense, layered noise I couldn't fully categorize. The Keth Center is beginning to pull back, I said. We estimate full withdrawal in 15 minutes, she said. Maybe 12. Our estimate was 22. Your estimate didn't account for Diaz. Who is doesn't matter. I logged Diaz. Well, unknown human unit member. Apparently a variable significant enough to affect large-scale engagement timelines. Request for further honestly, information denied. This is, to be fair, becoming a pattern. He was carrying something that I can only describe as the marriage of 3 different weapon systems that have been introduced to each other at high velocity and then persuaded to cooperate. The plumbing tool I had seen earlier was attached to part of it. There was also what appeared to be a door hinge. He was limping. Plus, not badly. Not the limp of someone managing a serious injury, but the specific limp of someone managing an inconvenient one, the kind you don't stop for because stopping would make it real. He didn't look at me. He looked at the contact zone in front of us, and then he looked at a small device strapped to his forearm, and then he said to no one I could identify, 2 more minutes. Then we pushed him through. He kept walking. I logged. Look, Diaz is a large human male who appears to have assembled a weapon out of components that individually wouldn't constitute a weapon. He is injured and either doesn't know it or has decided not to participate in that information. He smells strongly of combustion accelerant. I have many questions, which I'm going to ask none of them. To be fair, Keth Center began its retreat at 7 hours, 19 minutes, and 55 seconds. 13 minutes after Morrow's estimate, 2.5 minutes after Diaz's estimate. Log Morrow's accuracy at 86.7%. I logged Diaz's accuracy at 100%. I flagged the file for review by anyone in the command chain who might want to understand what I have been watching for the past hour and 13 minutes. As of the writing of this record, no one has requested the file. 7 hours, 24 minutes, and 18 seconds. The engagement was over before I fully registered it was over. That is, I realize the mirror image of how it began. The line collapsed before I identified the moment of collapse. The line reformed before I identified the moment of reformation. Both events were continuous things masquerading as single moments, and I'm a person trained to identify single moments, and I was wrong both times. Our forward units were advancing. Plus, the Keth were withdrawing. The tactical display looked, for the first time since 5 hours and 41 minutes, like a situation with a direction I understood. I stood at the edge of the command post and watched. Tessari came to stand beside me. She didn't say anything for almost 3 minutes, which for a veteran officer is a very long time. Get the full after-action data to archive, she said finally. Everything. Your logs, the sensor captures, the Keth relay intercepts. All of it. Yes, Commander. And Vel. Commander. She paused. The fourth eye, the one veterans rarely use for direct communication, the peripheral one, the one that's technically vestigial according to our biologists, turned toward the contact zone. Find out who Diaz is. I found Sergeant Morrow at 7 hours, 31 minutes, and 14 seconds at the edge of the Reform Supply Depot, which was no longer a rubble field in the same sense that it had been. It was now a rubble field with purpose, with humans moving through it in that same organized casual arrangement, securing equipment, redistributing loads. She was eating something. I can't identify what she was eating, and it was in a foil packet, and it appeared, from the expression on her face, to be approximately as enjoyable as my processed regret. She ate it with the focused dedication of someone who hasn't eaten in a long time and is making a principled decision to eat anyway. 33 minutes, I said. You said 30. She glanced at me. Diaz was in a mood. Is he? I checked the unit's status I had pulled from the manifest. He was limping. He's fine. He smelled like he's fine. The edge in her voice wasn't hostility. It was the specific flatness of someone who has had to have the he's fine conversation before and has developed a policy about not extending it. Was there something you needed, Veloshari? I stood there for a moment. I had come with tactical follow-up questions. Debrief questions. Questions about, in my opinion, the mind egress route and the dispersal pattern and the thing Morrow's people had built from components I couldn't identify and what exactly Diaz had done in the last 2 minutes of the engagement that had accelerated the Keth withdrawal by 3 to 6 minutes, depending on whose estimate you used. I had all basically those questions, which what came out was, how did you know 30 minutes? She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted. Not softer, exactly, but less compressed. The face of someone considering whether the answer is worth the time it takes to give. I mean, experience, she said. I stopped. Restarted. Plus, that's not an answer. No, she said. It isn't. She took another bite of her unidentifiable food. We've been doing this for a while. I logged. Sergeant Morrow defines a while with no reference to a timeline. And I think, the absence of further data, I'm going to assume she means long enough. Whatever that means for a human. I suspect it means something different than it would for me. They were all on it, all 43, manifest checked, and verified by a logistics officer who had appeared from somewhere. I still don't know from where, and processed the departure with the bureaucratic serenity of someone who hadn't watched what I had watched for the past 90 minutes. I stood on the landing pad and watched the ship rise. At the top of the ramp, before the seal closed, I saw Morrow. She didn't wave. She looked down at the ridge, at the terrain that had been a losing battle 90 minutes ago, at the veteran units that were still cautiously advancing through the silence the Keth withdrawal had left behind. She looked at it the same way she had when she got off the ship, like pretty much a problem considered and set down. Then the ramp closed and the ship was gone. 7 hours, 45 minutes, and 53 seconds. I filed the after-action report at 7 hours, 45 minutes, and 53 seconds, and flagged it for command-level review. I included everything. The sensor anomalies, the improvised equipment, the mined egress route, Diaz, the compression and flank tactic that I still don't have a proper name for. The way they move through the terrain like water doesn't because that is a cliche, but because I can't think of a better description and I've been trying. I included my personal logs. I included the timestamp of every moment I didn't understand what I was watching, which is most of them. I included one final note, which I'm reproducing here because I think it's the only part of the record that says what I'm actually trying to say. We sent a distress signal on a desperate frequency at a desperate hour. 43 humans came out of ship at the worst possible moment and did something I don't have the vocabulary to classify as a military engagement or a tactical operation or a battle in any form I was trained to recognize. They won a fight I had already finished losing. They departed before I could fully debrief them, before I could assign category to what I witnessed, before the documentation caught up to the reality. I've been a signals officer for 18 months. I log everything. I timestamp everything. Plus, I've never felt the inadequacy of a log the way I felt it today. Whatever category they exist in, whatever word applies to what 43 people did to a full Keth forward element on a morning when the math had stopped working, it isn't a word I know yet. I'm going to find out what it's, and I'm going to find Diaz first.